many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. One thing I'm going to be diving into on today's broadcast, we'll get into a little bit about the Oregon standoff, something that I've covered a little bit of. I haven't drenched you in a whole bunch of news about it because there's a lot of problems with a lot of the information coming out, and trying to pick through it and find the correct information has been kind of hard. And then even with the video that the police released, the clips that were on a lot of YouTube where portions of it were kind of edited a little bit, getting the original footage and going frame by frame, you see some things there. But we'll get into that just a little bit further into the broadcast tonight. Because, again, there's a lot of information that needs to be discussed and needs to be talked about. Okay, I wanted to get into yesterday's Ron Paul Liberty Report, and all this kind of plays into even the Oregon thing, but a lot of what's going on in the world and in America. And this is Anatomy of the Deep State and Open Conspiracy. Ron Paul Liberty Report from yesterday. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me today, and it's good to see you, Daniel.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Daniel, we have a special guest today who's going to explain to us how the Congress worked and why they always spend too much money. He is the expert on the finances of Congress. Mike Lofgren. Mike is our guest. Mike, thank you for being with us today.
Good to be here, Dr. Paul.
Good. Mike did spend a lot of time in Washington, like 28 years, and he didn't solve all the problems. So I want to know where the problems are. You've written about that, and the book that gets people's attention is The Deep State, and that's a subject that we've dealt with on this program. And you talk about this, and you use your experience, in the Congress. But tell us a little bit about what your goals were and maybe the biggest frustration you had while being in Washington and in government.
Well, I think what I'm trying to expose is that this partisan circus that the media concentrate on so greatly is something of a charade. I mean, there are two parties. They certainly have different views on social issues like gay marriage or abortion, things like that. But on the big money issues, who gets what? Who gets the contracts? The whole infrastructure of permanent war and all the money that's flowing into the military-industrial complex. On that, they're somewhat similar. There may be differences, but there are more nuances than outright differences. You'll notice that who was Barack Obama, the candidate for hope and change, in 2009 when he assumed office? Who does he appoint as Secretary of Defense? It was Bob Gates, who was not only George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense, who engineered the surge that Obama campaigned against. He's been a Bush dynasty consigliere back to the early 1980s. Or in the Treasury, you've got Tim Geithner. He and Hank Paulson, Bush's Secretary of the Treasury, were birds of a feather.
Well, that is for sure. That's something that I've been preaching for a long time. There's no difference between the two parties, and you make that point so clearly. But there was a title to an article that you wrote that got my attention, and I think it's interesting in sorting out how these things come about. And this was the title that was in The Guardian. It says, "An oligarchy has broken our democracy." And I just want to see if I'm misunderstanding this, because I don't have high regards for democracy in some ways, because the democracy means that, all you have to do is get a majority vote and you can do whatever you want. So if the oligarchs get together and they control the vote, they get control of government. Now, is that a lot different than your understanding? Or I know there can be different definitions for democracy, but I think sometimes democracy might set this up instead of having a government that just is there for one purpose, and that's to protect our liberties rather than sorting out the majority vote.
Well, I think our Constitution is supposed to do that. We have representative democracy. We have, in theory, the public voting for representatives. We have balances of power, checks and balances, and three co-equal branches of government. But what I think has happened is we don't see that anymore, partly because of the aspects of the deep state that I've seen over the years take over. When the executive branch wants to go to war, the legislative branch pretty much rolls over. And as far as the judicial branch, they believe in these phony doctrines like the State Secrets Act, which was actually made based on perjured testimony in about 1953 following the crash of a U.S. Air Force aircraft. So they're basically giving carte blanche to the executive branch based on perjured testimony.
Right. Daniel.
Mike, first I want to say how happy I am to have you on the show. Back in 2000 when I first moved to Washington and I was amongst the neocons, a mutual friend of ours, John Laughlin, who's now on the board of our Ron Paul Institute, introduced us, and I was so happy to finally have a kindred spirit. And over the years, of course, we had lunch together quite often on the Hill, so it's wonderful to have you. And I'm so glad that you've written these books that you've done, especially this latest one, which is so interesting, and it rings so true. But of course, as I always do when I'm looking at the book, I go to Amazon, and I always want to click on the 1-star reviews, because those are in some ways the more interesting ones. And it struck me when I looked at some of the 1-star, and there weren't many, thankfully, on your book, the 1-star reviews. It was essentially the same. He sounds like a leftist. What's his problem with conservatives? And I was thinking as I was reading that, this is exactly the problem. Anyone who criticizes the system as such is either, oh, he sounds like a liberal, or he sounds like a right-wing kook. How do you respond? Am I on target with this?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps Karl Rove's American Crossroads pays people to go on Amazon and give these one-star reviews. That's my own comment on it. I tend to think that ideology as such tends to be a mental cage, and that when you think things through pragmatically based on real principles and how you're going to solve the problem, you will sound out of the mainstream, because most people use their ideologies and their partisan affiliations as a kind of crutch not to think and to become part of a herd and to follow the herd instinct. And that's what I'm not about. And I'll tell you, my sort of falling off the horse on the road to Damascus was the whole surreal period between 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq. I looked at all the intel regarding Iraq and its so-called weapons of mass destruction. I looked at all the intel regarding its so-called affiliation with Al-Qaeda, and it looked very weak, sketchy, circumstantial, and blown out of proportion. Yet people were going kind of like lemmings rushing off a cliff to follow the leader, George Bush, Dick Cheney, and the rest of their cabal of neocon. Basically, we can call them warmongers. And that's where I got the idea that this whole ideology business, at least as it's practiced within the Beltway, is antithetical to thinking.
You know, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir.
Now, I was going to follow up on this concept of the deep state, because I agree with you entirely about, you know, how the oligarchs and the special interests, protect themselves and take control of things. But it's pretty evident. But a lot of times when I talk about or think about the deep state, I often think about the CIA and something that is so deep, it's the deeper state, because I'm not sure anybody in Washington, other than those who are running it, know about it. I can't even understand how a single president might be able to control some of the secrecy that goes in government, because they have secret financing and all these things. Do you think that most of the problem that you see is the type of thing that you concentrate on here, on how the finances work and the lobbying works, and Congress goes to sleep and they run roughshod over us? Or could you talk me into saying, well, be less concerned about the secret state, because we can't figure that out?
Well, I mean, it really is a problem. I will aver to that. I mean, we can go back to the 50s. Allen W. Dulles was pulling the wool over Eisenhower's eyes. He was engineering the Bay of Pigs invasion under Eisenhower, approving the flights of the U-2 over Russia just when Ike was attempting to conduct a summit meeting with Russia, and embarrassed him tremendously. And of course, once John Kennedy got elected and in office, he was wet behind the ears. He didn't understand all the ramifications of what was going on. The Bay of Pigs invasion was already engineered and in the box and ready to be let out. And it was a complete disaster. And we have the same things today. We have John Brennan, who was a senior official at the CIA under Bush. He was the man in 2008 who schooled President Obama in foreign policy. And I think he may have been one of the reasons that Obama, who was going to filibuster against the FISA Amendments Act, which retroactively legalized illegal behavior on the part of the telecoms, that's why he ended up voting for it. He was surrounded by Brennan and people like him, which is also why presidents they may differ in their views and they have a certain amount of power, but that power is limited in scope because of the people who surround them. Let's remember that one of Dick Cheney's foreign policy advisors was Victoria Nuland. She's now Assistant Secretary of State for Europe. She's one of the people who engineered the coup in Kiev in her infamous unencrypted cell phone call with Jeffrey Pyatt, our U.S. ambassador. She said, "Oh, this is the guy we're going to choose to become prime minister of Ukraine." Now, the Soviet or the Russian intelligence service, you can bet they'd be listening to that kind of traffic occurring in a country on their border, and you can be sure they would react as they reacted. If the Chinese were conspiring to take over the government of Canada in Ottawa, we'd be sending Abrams tanks over the border in about 5 minutes.
Mike, if I can read something from the preface of the book, because I thought, to me, it spoke to something that I've wanted to write in a way that I wish I could write, and it just captures it so perfectly. So if you don't mind, maybe I can just read it and you can react to this. Said, during the first years after 9/11, Washington's neoclassical core was defaced by checkpoints, miles of hideous Jersey wall, and swarms of ninja-suited security squads. The city began to look less like Pierre L'Enfant's architectural vision of the neoclassical capital of a virtuous republic and more like Cold War East Berlin. But what fascinated me most was to watch the reaction of tourists. A large number actually seemed impressed by the display. It was just like television, and they were in real life caught up in some drama out of a Tom Clancy novel or an episode of 24. It was something they could relate to via their media conditioning. One suspects the vast majority of Americans' acquiescence at airports and acceptance of surveillance can be traced to similar behavioral roots. If one is patted down or watched by the government, it is somehow reassuring to be worthy of all that trouble. I think that captures the conditioning of Americans so perfectly.
Well, it is a kind of conditioning, and we can see it in big ways and small through TV series like 24, which always have the ticking time bomb scenario that's not necessarily credible. I recall once that Michael Chertoff, who was the head of the Department of Homeland Security, actually went to some confab at the Heritage Foundation in which they bestowed an award on 24, and Chertoff was acting like a fan at the Hollywood premiere of some film and saying how 24 was just like real life. So the guy that actually runs the Department of Homeland Security was caught up in his own perceptual loop of pretending it's just like television. Another thing is we have this conditioning even in professional sports. The NFL has revenues of something like $10 billion a year, even though it's been a nonprofit. And yet, the military, the Department of Defense, has paid millions of dollars to NFL professional teams to stage patriotic displays during halftime.
Disgusting. Mike, that is disgusting what's happening now. I want to ask you a question more in general of the consequence of allowing the deep state to exist. Because right now it looks like it's pretty powerful in their control and the political parties mean nothing, and you pointed that out, and there's so much control. But it seems to me like there are quite a few different elements involved here. One, you mentioned the Constitution and how they act outside the Constitution, so the issue of liberty is there. The issue of finance is there. Money keeps getting spent and it's going to special interests, and the country's getting poorer. we end up going to war in an unconstitutional fashion. Now, I'm looking for the wake-up call for the American people. And do you think there can be a wake-up call where they'll finally wake up and say, we can't do it because the current system can't continue? I don't believe it can continue for a lot of reasons. One will be the finances and other things, and people get disgusted. Do you sort of anticipate that there will be a wake-up call? Or do you think we're at the early stages of that, where the people are going to speak out and say enough is enough and we need to change things?
Well, 6 months ago, as I was finishing up this book, I would not have anticipated some of the events we've seen now. What I'm about to say does not constitute either an endorsement or a critique of the policies of the people involved. But I will say, on the one hand, you've got Donald Trump and you've got Bernie Sanders, and their business models for campaigning, for raising money, the themes they operate off are scaring the daylights out of the party oligarchs. Because on one hand, you have Donald Trump, in his own extremely modest estimation, richer than God, saying he doesn't need money from oligarchs. And that appeals to a certain portion of the voters. These are people who maybe cannot connect the dots. They don't really have much knowledge of what's going on because commercial media make sure they don't know about it. They make sure they know about Kim Kardashian, but they know something's going wrong in the country. And Trump's extremely blunt appeal kind of appeals to them. Yeah. Sanders, on the other hand, is railing against the oligarchy of Wall Street, and he's got like 1 million plus contributors, and it's small amounts of money, less than $30. He's breaking the sort of Hillary mold where you declare your candidacy, then you go to Goldman Sachs and hold a fundraiser, then you jet out to the West Coast and have a fundraiser in David Geffen's mansion with all the glitterati. Right. We're seeing something different now.
Right. Mike, we're going to have to close shortly, but Daniel has another question for you, then we're going to finish up.
Well, I just wanted to remind the viewers that Mike Lofgren's new book, The Deep State, The Fall of the Constitution and the Rise of a Shadow Government. I would encourage people who are interested in this to purchase and read the book. Just a final thing I'd like to mention, Mike, and I guess this is slightly more of a comment. I really enjoyed, and thankfully we were able to put up on the Institute's website, a recent piece you did for Bill Moyers on the rise of the mega mansions in Washington, D.C. And you tied this appropriately enough, at least partially, to the rise of the military-industrial complex and the various cottage industries built up around that. And, it's disgusting to me to see how wealthy Washington is. And I think middle America, who unfortunately is given a flag and told to celebrate patriotism, well, these people are getting rich off of these phony military state, security state. They're being ripped off in a big way. And I do hope, as Dr. Paul mentioned, that they may wake up to the fact that these are not the patriots inside the Beltway.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of S-Class Mercedes being driven around the Beltway right now that were bought with contracts based on permanent war, and for that matter, the permanent political campaign. We've got so many consultants, pollsters, and political operatives who also built their little mansions or McMansions based on the way we raise and spend money here.
Mike, I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and I hope our audience will pay attention and get hold of your book, The Deep State, because it has an important message, and it talks a lot about what we've been talking about for a long time on this program. But I want to thank the audience for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. And remember, we have to expose the government for what they're doing if we're ever going to get a change. And I think there are a lot of problems out there that we have to face up to. And unfortunately, we're going to have maybe a major crisis to come up with the right answers. I think people are waking up and realizing it. As Mike points out, they're starting to realize this. But boy, coming around to agreeing what really has to be done and be willing to go along, they're not ready for this, because right now you don't see Bernie Sanders talking about cutting spending or lowering taxes. No, raise taxes and no more spending. And it's always the government that's going to do it, not recognizing the fact the government creates nothing. They have to steal it from somebody. So we are facing that crisis, and I think understanding the deep state and who really is our government makes the perfect point. There's no two-party system. Somebody asked me once whether I thought we should have a third party. And I said, no, we should have a second party, a freedom party, because right now the two parties are about one party. On occasion, there'll be one or two will stand out and try to change it from within. So far, it hasn't worked. So I think, of course, the easiest way to start on a problem like this is look to the Constitution and look for men and women of integrity if we're going to still work through the system of government that we have. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Subscribe to him on YouTube and check out the articles also on RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Now, we've talked about this many of times about there is no two-party system when you look at the fundamental ideology that both parties tend to base themselves on. And that is growing government and having government control more. They just argue on control what? What aspects of your personal life do they want to control? And at what speed they want to go. They pick and choose. Well, we'll kind of go full bore with this because we disagree with the other side on this. And we're willing to, argue the arguments and fight the fights to continue to do it. And there's certain things that are like, yeah, a lot of our side tends to participate in this or, whatnot. So we're not going to rattle that cage because that might hurt our side. But they're both growing government and putting laws and regulation that always turns around, bites the other side in the butt too, eventually, because we continually go back and forth. But they still have a basis of big government controlling people's lives, controlling people's behavior. And you're not getting a choice. Again, last broadcast, I equated it to choosing what foot you want kicking you in the butt, the left one or the right one. And eventually that one's going to get tired and the next one's going to start kicking. And that's what it comes down to. Now, I said we can equate this to things like the Oregon standoff. Well, where did all the anger come from that we had this standoff? And it's been federal government seizing and taking control of land out west. In Oregon, Utah, Nevada. And basically doing things to run people off of their property that their family owned for hundreds of years. And this has happened under both parties. Again, you're not getting a choice. You're getting an illusion. And again, I do want to get into this Oregon thing here. And I want to play this, but let me see how long it is. This is a interview with the lawyer. This was out of truthandmedia.com. And this would be a constitutional lawyer, too. Okay, yeah, I'll play this one. This in truthandmedia.com, constitutional lawyer, Chris Ann Hall on Oregon standoff. And this was an interview with Joshua Cook out of Truth and Media. And I got an article that I will follow up. And that article is out of the New American behind the Oregon standoff. So first I'll play this short interview here with Chris Ann Hall, discussing basically the final moments of the Oregon standoff. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
At truthandmedia.com, and my name is Joshua Cook, and I have the honor to have on the phone with me Chris Ann Hall, constitutional attorney. And Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to come out. I know you've been busy.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, I wanted to bring you on the show because there's a lot of information going on on the internet and from different sources about what's going on right now in Oregon. I was wondering if you could kind of give us a update on what's going on right now, because I know you were on the ground, you taught some classes, and also you have a lot of members of your organization. Tell us a little bit about your organization, and then give us a recap of what's going on in Oregon right now.
Well, I'm a member of a group called the Coalition of Western States. I'm their legal advisor, and they are a group of legislators across the country, along with state, local, county, that sort of type of legislators, and we also have law enforcement officers, attorneys, judges, who are very concerned about the condition of the Western states and the servitude that the Western states have been thrown into under the federal government's overreach and land grab. And Michelle Fiore is one of our members, and she is the lady that everybody heard last night on the internet, trying to talk the people into leaving the refuge and letting us deal with this battle from a different perspective. And she did a fabulous job. And so last night, the 4 remaining people at the refuge decided to leave, and they scheduled that they would be leaving at 8 o'clock this morning, Pacific time. And so that's where, unfortunately, the real excitement began. It was put off. Franklin Graham flew out there to help Michelle Fiore guarantee safe passage and to help encourage the people to leave. And they arrived on the scene, and 3 of the members of the refuge left, but 1 refused.
Right.
And his name is David, and I happened to be speaking on the live feed about the teaching that I'd been doing. I was trying to encourage the people in the refuge. They were getting scared. They were getting nervous about leaving. They were, there's a huge sense of distrust going on. Will the feds keep their word and not shoot us as we're walking out? And are we surrendering? Are we giving up? Are we losing this fight by walking away? And I just wanted to let them know that their voice is being heard, and there's a huge awakening going on in America. And I was telling them that I taught over 24 legislators in Idaho yesterday about the constitutional role and duty of the state legislators, and I've been teaching legislators around the country, and people are awakening, and they're hearing, and there's such a passion now rising because of what's happening. So I was telling them, look, we've got the battle. You've done your part. Let's just leave the refuge and trust us to help you. And so the first 2 went out, the husband and wife went out holding hands, and they were greeted by Franklin Graham and Michelle Fiore and hugs, and everybody was happy. And then the third man left, and the same results, but David refused to leave. And I just happened to be on the live feed when this was going on. This was not something that was planned by any part. And David started talking about how he didn't want to leave, about how he felt like it was quitting, about how he was there, give me liberty or give me death, and I'm ready to die. And at one point he even said, I have a gun to my head. And for 2 hours, Gavin and I talked to him and convinced him that the battle was worth living for, and that he just needed to walk out the door. And we got him almost 2 hours. We got him up off the bed and moving, and we got him to the door. And when he got to the door, the FBI was finally ready to talk to him. He was begging the FBI to talk to him. They refused to call him. They refused to speak to him. Franklin Graham was speaking over a loudspeaker. Michelle Fior was speaking over a loudspeaker. But when he went inside, he was there just laying on the bed, and they couldn't reach him from outside. So Gavin and I were really the only voices that he had at that time. And we were just trying to tell him what he had to live for, and how many people were appreciating the voice that he had, and how much we needed his voice to continue. And I tell you what, I've never been in a situation so stressful in my whole life, and it was just crazy.
Did the FBI, did they voice any, did they thank you guys? I mean, this could have turned pretty bloody, definitely pretty bloody. Did they say anything like, hey, you guys did a good job to negotiate this outcome?
No, I've not heard anything from the FBI. I don't know. I think when we finally got him to walk out, he was staying in a tent, and we finally got him to walk out of the tent. There was finally an FBI negotiator on the scene that was willing to talk to him. So 2 hours after he's threatening to commit suicide and threatening to die, the FBI finally sends a negotiator to talk to him. And so the negotiator was able to encourage him that the FBI was not going to break their promise. He was worried about his safety. He says, how do I trust these people? How do I know that I step out of here and I won't be killed? He said, I have no reason to trust them.
Yeah, I know, because
we just kept telling him, look.
Yeah, they reference Lavoie, the fact that he had his hands up, and the eyewitness, Victoria Sharp, basically said, I know it's contradicting what the FBI said, but basically, Lavoie had his hands up and he was shot. So I understand where they're coming from, and I'm just glad that it turned out. But it was really fascinating that people like you and Dr. Graham cared so much about this issue. How involved was Franklin Graham in this whole situation?
I'm not familiar as to when he became involved. I'm fairly certain that when the four were left and we were trying to negotiate a peaceful pass for them, that's when he became involved and said that he would go drive out there and be with them. And I think that it was very good that he was there, and he was very good that Michelle was there, because that was help to us to tell David, nothing's going to happen to you while Franklin Graham and Michelle Fior are standing there watching. And we've got 30,000 people online listening to this live feed. And so, the other thing is they knew that Cliven Bundy had been arrested at the airport while he was on his airplane. And so it's incredible the level of distrust now that has been fostered by the, I think, irrational and untimely actions of our federal government to do these things at a time when the situation was so fragile. And so this whole thing of distrust was everywhere. And I am just grateful to God that we were able to calm him down and speak something that made sense to him, so that he would actually get up and walk out of the tent.
Yeah, I know, because I was up last night listening to the live feed, and it's pretty amazing the role that technology has played in this whole last 24 hours. It was pretty amazing, pretty intense moments. I heard them talking about the FBI taunting them, really engaged in psychological warfare. And I don't know if that was true or not, but I know that, that's what was noted last night. But can you...
Yeah, there was a lot of reports of that every time they went to start praying, the FBI would come over the loudspeakers and that's part of the atmosphere of distrust that was bred here. David he kept asking them, he kept shouting out the tent, call me, I want to talk to the FBI, I want them to hear my demands, I want them to hear me, and they would not speak to him. And he was feeling confused, he was feeling helpless, he was feeling hopeless, and he was like, look, they won't even talk to me now. Why would I walk out there? They won't even hear me. I might as well just stay here and die.
Yeah. And let's back up for a moment here. The reason why they were there was protesting the injustice of the Hammond family and, this frustration with the federal government. So can you maybe walk us through the reason why these protesters were there in the first place?
Well, this really is just sort of the straw that's broken the camel's back with the Hammond thing. What we need to realize is that farmers and ranchers have been battling for decades with the federal government taking more and more of their land and restricting more and more of their use. And when the federal government has no constitutional authority to own that land. I mean, there's only two prescribed, technically three prescribed times that the federal government can have any control over property. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 gives us two of those times, and one is for Washington, D.C., which is not to exceed 10 miles square. So Washington, D.C., by Constitution, can't be any bigger than 10 miles square, and they have the authority over that. And for the operation of forts and ports with the consent of the state and the necessary buildings to operate the forts and ports. The only other section in the Constitution that deals with the land authority of the federal government is Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, which deals with territories and properties owned by the United States. Well, territories are not properties owned by the United States. Territories are properties that are held in trust by the United States for future states. And Jefferson said very plainly that once those states become independent governments and they petition to join the Union, then the property is to never return back to the federal government. The property in Section 4, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 that talks about the property owned by the United States is a reference back to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. So it's not an expansion of their land ownership. It's a reference back to that, saying this is how this is supposed to work. And so there is no constitutional authority for the federal government to have national forests or refuge or parks or manage land other than what's already prescribed. And everybody who says differently, they cannot point to the Constitution, but what they do point to is Supreme Court opinions. And they say, well, Chrisanne, you're wrong because they created this federal act, and then the Supreme Court said we interpret this clause to mean this. And what we have now is a situation where the federal government has been given the authority by itself to expand its own power. And we're operating now with a government who is only limited by its own desires and its own whims and its own definitions.
So where are we at as far as like our First Amendment right at this point? Because it seems that, protesters have a right to protest when the federal government, infringes on people's rights. Where do we go from here?
Well, I believe that the protests that we need to be engaging in, and I really wholeheartedly believe that the ranchers and the farmers need to be organized and they need to start protesting. And we need to take up the lessons that we learned from people like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King and understanding what peaceful protests look like, and that peaceful protests are the only way that we are going to be able to make any type of impact, because we have to understand we're not just battling with the government, we're battling with the media, we're battling with public opinion, we're battling with a universal ignorance in America on the proper role of government. And so if we can take the cues from the people who were successful at real civil rights movements, perhaps we can start a new civil rights movement for ranchers and farmers and landowners.
Well, I know you're spending your entire life educating people, and I do appreciate it. What's the feedback? 'Cause I know you've been in Burns, Oregon. You've been to different groups educating people on the Constitution. What's the feedback that you're getting?
Oh, it's great. It's absolutely fabulous. We're getting bigger crowds. We're getting younger crowds. We're teaching more people. I am now more frequently teaching state legislators, county commissioners, city councilmen. I'm teaching judges. I'm teaching in churches because our people in the churches need to be awakening to their responsibilities and duties. And I'm teaching high school, middle school students, college students. I'm teaching all over. I do about 265 lessons in over 22 states every single year. And this is beginning year number 6. And in Burns, we taught over 300 people one night, over 400 people another night. Just in Idaho, in 2 days, I've taught almost 500 people. And so, and I'm going to be teaching another crowd tonight in Idaho. And so it's very encouraging because the dialogue is now being open. Thomas Paine wrote a series of essays called The American Crisis, and the first one he said that that these crises actually have a benefit, right? They open a dialogue so that people will now start seeking the truth, and that they also expose those that are sincere to the cause and those that are hypocrites to the cause. And I think that we're seeing a lot of all that happening. So everything is very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, actually, I know you're going to a class tonight, and I do appreciate your time on our program here. If people can find you for more information about what you're doing, where should they go?
I have a website. It's krisannehall.com, KrisAnnehall.com. I have a radio show that is broadcast 5 days a week and a television show, and we have lots and lots of resources on the website that will help people understand what our framers intended for our Constitution. I'm not really a teacher as much as I'm a facilitator, you know. I just bring the teaching of our founders and their intentions for the Constitution forward and let people make their own decisions.
Well, Krisannehall, Hall, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the program, and I'm so glad that it turned out without any more bloodshed. So
yeah,
you know, and I appreciate
that was. Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show, and I want to thank you for your support in this. I thank Truth in Media for what you guys are doing all the time. I'm a big fan. So let me just say I love what you guys are doing, and I'm excited about the hope that we're bringing to the people through this truth in the new media that we have.
Truthinmedia.com, Joshua Cook and Krisannehall Hall, the constitutional lawyer. To kind of go with the whole what's behind the Oregon standoff right here, out of the New American behind this Oregon standoff. We'll get into this to kind of follow along with what she was talking about. And this kind of first starts off with Dwight Hammond. On January 4th, Oregon rancher Dwight Hammond and his son Stephen began their second prison sentence, entering the federal correctional institution, Terminal Island, a low-security prison in Los Angeles Harbor. They were prosecuted as terrorists under the federal Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of '96 for controlled burns on their own property in 2001 and 2006 that got out of control and spread to around 150 acres of federal Bureau of Land Management land, on which the Hammonds own or have grazing rights. And again, she pointed out that constitutionally, the federal government's not even supposed to own land. says here the fires caused no real damage and no threat to lives, homes, or property um, of other citizens. In fact, the BLM acknowledged that the 2001 fire for which the Hammonds were prosecuted had actually improved range conditions on the public lands. In their first trial, the federal judge ruled that the sentencing the Hammonds as terrorists to the 5-year sentence demanded by federal prosecutors would shock the conscience of the court. It shocked the conscience of many other observers as well, but they demanded that these dangerous terrorists serve the full 5-year prison term. In stark contrast to BLM, U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and other federal agencies are notorious for starting prescribed burns that regularly rage out of control over many thousands of acres, often destroying public buildings and facilities, endangering human life. In fact, excuse me, as we report in our companion story, in December, shortly before the Hammonds reported to prison, the federal government reversed itself on compensating farmers and ranchers in North and South Dakota who lost tens of millions of dollars in property and livestock destroyed by the 2013 Patre fire, a controlled burn started by the Forest Service. After initially promising to expedite remuneration to the struggling farmers and ranchers. Excuse me. Oh, wow. Struggling farmers and ranchers victimized by the federal arsons. The federal government first delayed all recompensation procedures and then ultimately refused compensation altogether, forcing their victims to spend their own money on lawyers to sue in court for redress and compensation. Federal fiascos. Patre fire is but one of many flagrant abuses that are fueling the widespread, smoldering resentment against federal agencies in the western states. The smoldering resentment can erupt into white-hot flashpoints, such as the armed Bundy Ranch standoff in Nevada in 2014 and the armed occupation of the Muller National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Oregon near the Hammonds Ranch, led by Amon and Ryan Bundy, sons of a Nevada rancher, Cliven Bundy. The takeover of the federal wildlife refuge, which was closed for the winter, began on January 2nd as a protest against the prosecution of the Hammonds, as well as a protest against federal government's oppressive control over such an enormous swath of public lands in the western states. While many people sympathize with the Hammonds and with the stated objectives of the Bundy-led occupiers, relatively few appear to agree with the extreme and illegal methods chosen by the occupiers. Even the Hammonds and Cliven Bundy distanced themselves from the occupation. Many recognize the action as misguided and counterproductive, a move that will encourage anarchy and provide federal authorities with the pretext for even more extreme measures against rural property owners and gun owners. Not to mention providing the liberal big city media with more opportunity to unfairly depict rural opponents of federal harassment as anti-government, anti-environment, redneck, belligerent yahoos. Nevertheless, the Obama administration's aggressive use of executive orders to unconstitutionally bypass Congress and enact its own environmental regulations indicates that we can expect an um, intensification of the adversarial attitude by federal agencies toward ranchers, farmers, and rural property owners. The EPA's new waters of the United States interpretation all by itself guarantees collisions between federal authorities and property owners, according to Obama's EPA. Even dry land miles from any navigable waters is still subject to EPA's arbitrary and capricious jurisdiction because the rainwater that sinks into the ground is somehow connected to um, navigable waters, and they call these watersheds. But your water can shed off your property and head towards the lakes, or it can soak in the ground. Who cares? It's bull, and they're doing it with creeks. They're calling them watersheds. So they're even taking it, and this is just from personal experience. I see creeks that lead into more either a lake or larger creeks, rivers. Um, it can be a creek that turns into a stream and then into just the side of the road. And they will call that a waterway because, well, it's a water supply there that's still connected to the river. Then they will consider property all around that little creek ditch and call that a watershed. So they can really control large swaths, because if you think about it, you have creeks that run through how many farms throughout the country? Basically, they are all of a sudden in control of most land in the United States under that, if you think about it. It says here, this virtually guarantees the escalation of tensions and certainly of more confrontations that could turn violent. The vast majority of America's population is now concentrated in urban and suburban areas, and most Americans have probably not set foot on a real working farm or ranch other than on a grade school field trip. Few have any knowledge of or appreciation for the desperation of farmers and ranchers who are being hammered on all sides and driven off their land, oftentimes land that has been cared for by their families and families for generations. Urban dwellers depend on for their news on the big corporate media networks, which uniformly dispense a radical pro-environment bias that generally characterizes farmers and ranchers along with loggers, miners, manufacturers, and in general all producers as nasty polluters and exploiters who are desperately nature for ugly profit. Ironically, and in many cases intentionally, this radical enviro ideology has led to policies that have destroyed hundreds of thousands of family-owned farms, ranches, and properties, making us all more dependent on huge corporate agribusiness farms and feedlots that the activists claim to harbor and oppose. Thousands of farmers and ranchers are facing extinction, and many know that, like the Hammonds and OC and Kerry Mills and others, they could also go to prison for an unintentional violation on um, arcane, unreasonable, and unconstitutional federal regulation. As mentioned above, this is the second time the Hammonds have gone to prison for the same offense. In the first trial in 2012, federal district court judge Michael Hogan ruled that imposing a 5-year mandatory minimum prison sentence on the Hammonds, as sought by federal prosecutors under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, would shock the conscience of the court. It would result in a sentence which is grossly disproportionate to the severity of the offenses here, he said. It just would not meet any idea I have of justice proportionality. The Hammonds' actions, Judge Hogan reasoned, could not have been conduct intended under the law. Judge Hogan used his discretionary authority to sentence Dwight Hammond, now 74, to 3 months in prison, followed by a 3-year of supervised release. Dwight's son, now 46 and a father of 3, was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison, also to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. The Hammonds served their sentence starting in 2013. They were also forced to accept a settlement in which they agreed to pay $400,000 for firefighting costs and to give the BLM the first option to buy their land if they are forced to sell. Many critics have opinion that getting the Hammond Ranch and making an example of them to break the will of others who might resist federal domination is the real motive behind the persecution of the Hammonds. Former BLM employee Greg Alun says BLM has a real hatred of the Hammonds with whom he sympathizes. I feel bad for them. They lost a lot and they're going to lose more, Alun said of the ranchers. They are not terrorists, he told the Capitol Press. There's this hatred in the BLM for them, and I don't get it. Is it the hatred that explains the disproportionate prosecution and sentencing? And is this hatred motivated by a desire of federal bureaucrats to take the Hammonds' land? And is it tied into the even larger land grab proposal to turn much of eastern Oregon, 2.5 million acres larger than Yellowstone National Park, into a national monument, the most restrictive of national designations? The proposed Awahi Canyonlands Monument would kill the remainder of the ranching and farming and virtually all other productive activity in most of eastern Oregon. Many locals see the federal persecution of the Hammonds as a blatant message the feds were making an example of them to cow the other ranchers into submission. Justice done. The Obama Justice Department has more than a title displeased with Judge Hogan's ruling. It appealed to the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and found a judge who would impose the full 5-year terrorist sentence of the Hammonds. It is interesting that the ultra-liberal Ninth Circuit, popular known as the Ninth Circus due to its far-out legal theories and rulings, which is notorious for its opposition to the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, and for its tendency to overturn the convictions of the murderers, illegal aliens, child molesters, and drug dealers, had no problem with throwing the book at the Hammonds, who by many accounts have been good neighbors and model citizens. The Ninth Circuit accommodated the DOJ prosecutor's ruling that given the sentences of arson, a 5-year sentence is not grossly disproportionate to the offense. The DOJ trumpeted the victory Congress sought to ensure that anyone who maliciously damages the United States property by fire will serve at least 5 years in prison, declared U.S. Attorney Billy Williams. These sentences are intended to be long enough to deter those like Hammonds who disregard the law and place firefighters and others in jeopardy. They didn't disregard the law. However, the 5-year sentence will shock the conscience of a great many reasonable people who are aware of the facts in the case and are familiar with the larger context in which this drama is being played out. It is indeed a sentence that is grossly disproportionate to the offense. This is an important point that has been made by many farm bureaus, cattlemen associations, stock grower associations, and property rights groups all across the nation. Why the outrageous double standard, they ask. Why are the Hammonds harshly punished as terrorists while federal arsons who repeatedly torch vast areas of public land and private land get off scotch-free or even get promoted? Now, you can read the rest of that article at thenewamerican.com. There's still quite a bit there. And this is what a lot of people are asking. You know, what do we do when we have the Hammonds being charged as terrorists? Federal prison as terrorists. While we have actual terrorists called the federal government through their agencies, whether they're running rogue or not, you created these agencies and gave them false authority, and you're claiming you own land, unconstitutionally owning land. Okay. I want to get into this one. This out of controversialtimes.com. Let's see if I can get this to reload here. It didn't completely load the first time. But this one's titled Sheriff Blocks U.S. Marshals Illegal Seizure, Orders Them Off Property. Yeah, I want to play this clip here. Skip this commercial.
Afternoon. It was like a showdown in the Old West. A New Mexico sheriff taking a stand against armed U.S. Marshals in a land dispute in Carlsbad. News 13's Emily Younger tracked down the sheriff to ask him about it.
You can tell by the duct tape that I've been carrying this for quite some time now.
It might look like a worn-out booklet of the Constitution, but to Eddy County Sheriff Scott London, it's a guide to life, and the words printed inside have never been more clear to him than they were last December.
I wasn't doing it for fame or glory. I was just doing it because I'm trying to do the right thing.
It was just after 9 a.m., 2 weeks before Christmas, when U.S. Marshals, armed with automatic weapons, tore through this Carlsbad home. Inside was 20-year-old Wilson Bauman and her 1-year-old baby.
There was extremely loud banging at the door. And I could hear other people surrounding my house.
The feds were here to evict the mom and dispose of the property, claiming the home was going to be auctioned off because the owner had not paid his taxes. According to court documents, the owner had appealed the case but never had his day in court.
We certainly cannot be selling or disposing of property until due process has been exhausted.
Bauman's parents called the sheriff. London confronted the marshals.
I was aware that the case was pending and in appeals.
Marshals threatened to arrest the sheriff, but he stood his ground.
It's my oath. I took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States as well as the Constitution of New Mexico, and I felt bound to my oath.
I am very proud of him. Not very many people have the courage to stand up against an organization that's as large and powerful as the IRS.
Now, that was Emily Younger reporting. The appeal is still pending, but in 10 days, the IRS says it intends to auction off 3 of the owners' homes in Carlsbad. The sheriff sent a letter to the IRS requesting the agency cancel the auction. He hasn't said what he'll do if the IRS says no. Now, the family Emily just showed you has found another place to live.
I think the weather app's so critical.
Okay. Now, you know what I would do if I was a sheriff? I would arrest anybody trying to sell it. They can't sell property that they have not legally. If the guy still can appeal for it and his appeal is waiting for a date to be set, okay, he's waiting for a date to be set. He still can appeal it. He has nothing to appeal if they sell the house off and it's tore down. He no longer has that. What's he appealing? For an empty lot that has no value to it. Can't rent the empty lot. And that's one of the things that the federal agencies do all the time. And that's what is going on out west. We have agencies tearing down controlled burns that go out of control, that tend to burn down ranches and cattle. Kind of fishy. Before their court cases ever get heard. And then why are all the ranches surrounding all this land always having to go to court? And then their stuff somehow gets damaged or destroyed before they can go through all the court measures to try to save it. So they have nothing to fight for, then that BLM takes control over that property. And then guess what? The next set of ranchers that are on those outskirts start going through the same crap. And like with the IRS and the marshals, marshals shouldn't even be doing this. You should not have a marshal should be like, oh, it's in the hand of the appeals court. Well, you haven't finished going through all the necessary procedures. You can't go ahead and sell it yet. You haven't fully, because now there is a appeal in. Now the ownership of that is back in contention. And since it's an appeal, it's saying, hey, there wasn't, the full thing wasn't out in the case, and a judge is considering allowing an appeal and going to set a date, you have to keep the property as is. And it's sheriffs like that have been starting to stand up more and more. You're starting to see it because, well, when it was only happening in certain counties and certain states, and those counties were bought off, but it spreads and it spreads and it spreads, and you have large swaths of the West that are federal land now, and it's getting to a point that it's affecting everybody, and sheriffs know this, and they're going, this is corruption, and I'm not going to allow all this to happen. There was one in Indiana where a Amish farmer was getting harassed by, I believe it was the FDA, because of raw milk, and he kicked them out. So we need more people, and again, I feel like I'm a broken record here because I constantly talk about one of the most important people I believe that you vote for is your sheriff and your county council, and then your state. And you got to vote for people that are not going to let the federal government just come in and do whatever they want. We know this to be unconstitutional. We know the federal government's not supposed to own this property. They can hold onto territory in a trust so it can create its own government and become a state. And once it joins the union, the federal government is no longer supposed to own that property, cannot get that property back. Therefore, what they're doing is unconstitutional in two ways. One, they're not supposed to be able to own land, only territory, and territory is to be able to mature into a state, and it's only to have it as a trust to become a state. And then you have it unconstitutional on the second part of it, because once it becomes a state, it's supposed to be in no way ever supposed to go back to the federal government. And the only way the federal government could have it is in a trust to become a state. But it can't do it because it's already a state. And as that constitutional lawyer pointed out, she talked about, it's people are taking a Supreme Court opinion that was falsely represented. Because really they didn't have an opinion on what it meant when it was written. They had an opinion on what it should mean. And they're not supposed to even have opinions in that direction of what it should mean. They're supposed to have an opinion on what it was meant to be. And, they do that with the Second Amendment all the time, too. Okay. Find it here. Somehow I lost it. Okay. I got one here from We Are Change. This is a pretty quick one. and I kind of want to get into a little bit of the political side here before the end of the broadcast. We're at about 7:20, 7:21 right now. Somewhere around there. But this is how the establishment elite are rigging the presidential election from We Are Change.
The results are in from last night's New Hampshire primary, but most importantly, I want to make a video talking about the clear media manipulation and bias that's taking place right now. Obviously, we know that the mainstream media is in the hands of the corporate globalist government establishment, and they're showing their true colors right now, subtly and not subtly at all. Right now, everyone in New Hampshire last night voted for Bernie Sanders except for the very old and the very rich. But we have CNN here declaring Hillary Clinton the clear winner in the delegates in New Hampshire, even hours before the polls closed. Obviously manipulating the polls, obviously lying, obviously pushing people who are on the fence towards Hillary Clinton. We have ABC News that just tweeted this a few hours ago, showing all the presidential candidates who won last night with resting female dog face. But the real female dog, who was a clear loser last night, is shown here smiling, subtly manipulating you, showing you how she's so great and wonderful and happy. Meanwhile, everyone's miserable. Meanwhile, she lost and she's miserable. ABC News continued with their propaganda last night by only documenting 5 minutes of Bernie Sanders' speech on their website. Meanwhile, the full Hillary Clinton speech is on their website right now. CNN International also said Trump and Sanders win, while here in the United States, the CNN in the United States wrote that the outsiders win, and that Kasich was second, failing to mention Trump and Sanders in any way, shape, or form. The game is rigged. Hillary Clinton has clear establishment ties in the Democratic Party with the help of her husband, President Bill Clinton, and because of that, a lot of the superdelegates have announced that they will be already supporting Hillary Clinton, giving her a 45-1 superdelegate establishment Democratic advantage over Bernie Sanders. The game is rigged. We have the establishment in the Democratic Party already pushing her, already voting for her without even the major primaries happening yet. And the White House is standing by her, saying that they will not be interested in persecuting her, investigating her, or looking into her crimes when she was Secretary of State and when she held public office and lied and manipulated and did illegal things during her tenure. There is an FBI investigation officially confirmed just a few days ago that is taking place, but don't expect it to go anywhere because the White House has no interest at all, which they previously publicly stated, in even going after her. Now, how does Hillary Clinton get away with this? How does she manipulate the mainstream media? Well, according to Gawker and the Freedom of Information Act, thank you for that very important law, there's new information, new leaked emails coming out just showing you exactly how Hillary Clinton is manipulating the media. There was a journalist from The Atlantic that wrote the Hillary Clinton office in 2009 asking for a speech that she was giving at the CFR, asking for a transcript before the speech actually happened so he could write the article before anyone else. The Hillary Clinton team responded saying, yes, we will give this to you on 3 conditions. 1, you describe her voice as muscular. You describe that Holbrook, Mitchell, and Ross were in the audience. And 3, you will not mention that we just blackmailed you. And of course, the good prostitute, the good horse street media, the good journalist at The Atlantic who is succumbing, who is capitulating to the establishment said, yes, I will stay silent. You feed me information. I will write my articles like you want me to write. I will manipulate. I will lie. I will do favors for you. I will not do my job as a journalist and will be your private PR puppet pretending to be a journalist if you just feed me information. And this has officially come out. You can see the emails in the description below. All the sources to this video will be clearly documented, and you could see just a clear media bias. I know many people in the establishment of the mainstream media, and they tell me Hillary Clinton is impossible to work with. Everything that is said about her, everything that is described about her, every video, every comment, every word about her is strictly controlled by the Hillary Clinton campaign. All the journalists out there are selling out to power or selling out to access in order to get just a little bit of information, but they don't get it. It's not even information. It's more PR. The journalists have bent over. They have spread their cheeks and they said, just take whatever you want, Hillary Clinton. And that's what you see with the mainstream media doing, especially with last night's New Hampshire primary. They are so ballsy at the Hillary Clinton campaign that they even ask Twitter to censor hashtags that are anti-Hillary Clinton. There was a hashtag that was hashtag words that don't describe Hillary Clinton. The Hillary Clinton team reached out to the CEO of Twitter and said, you need to censor this right away. That's how brazen, that's how ballsy, that's how filled with just outright power these criminals are, that they want to censor Twitter. And of course, Twitter is capitulating silently, and they're going against anyone who is a conservative, anyone who is voicing their concerns, anyone who has any anti-establishment views, as we're seeing portrayed here. A well-known verified Twitter account that was conservative was recently unverified, and people are getting their Twitter accounts suspended, banned, and locked for unknown reasons. And this is mainly happening to people who are pro-Trump, people who are anti-Hillary Clinton, anti-establishment. Why is this happening? Well, Twitter just announced that they're going to have a new Trust and Safety Council. And who's on this Trust and Safety Council? Well, 40 organizations. Organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, like the Feminist Frequency, like anti-Gamergate activist Anita Sharkskin. Now, when you have people who don't believe in freedom of speech on a publicly used social media platform like Twitter, deciding what should be there, what should be banned, who should be unverified, who should be verified, you could see Twitter capitulating, again, bending over to the corporate globalist government elite. We know the media is run and controlled by these people. We have documented this on our YouTube channel. We have confronted the former CIA director James Woolsey, who's another globalist puppet tool, and we confronted him dead on about Operation Mockingbird, a declassified government document detailing how the CIA had full control and its own officers within the mainstream media. This is documented. We confronted him on it, and he nervously answered. Anderson Cooper, who had no journalism training at all, was trained to be in the CIA when was in college, runs away every single time I talk to the establishment tool, hides in his car, answers awkwardly every single time I ask him, what about Operation Mockingbird? What about the governments? What about the establishments? What about all the secrecy of the media manipulating us? And of course, that's what you get. Also, keep an eye out for Bloomberg. The media is all over him. They're desperate for him to run. They're also desperate for the establishment candidate who is pro-NDAA, anti-Bill of Rights, Marco Rubio. Obviously, Bloomberg is also one of their favorites that they're pushing since he's a liberal, globalist, billionaire Democrat. They're pushing these people because Trump and Bernie are getting a lot of favorable attention, a lot of public support. The establishment is losing. They're manipulating you, and you need to know about this. Be a rational human being. Don't be fooled by this corporate, globalist government establishment that is clearly trying to manipulate you. Share this video with anyone who you think is being manipulated. Thank you again so much for watching. Don't forget to support real independent media. Pick up a shirt. The proceeds from all the shirts go towards this real, free, and independent media organization that's run for you and by you. Thank you again so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. We're going to have a lot more content.
We Are Change on YouTube, wearechange.org. Subscribe. Now, we talked about this last broadcast about the whole delegate thing and watching Bernie, come out on top on the votes, but short on delegates for some odd reason. Oh, yeah, because it's a corrupted system. Well, when Ron Paul did it, he played the delegate game, definitely on the 2012, and had a large number of delegates. Well, the RNC just, let's keep some of them on a bus. Somehow that happened. Then we just kicked some of them out. That happened. Then we make a rule change that's scripted, and it was filmed. That happened to ensure that people like Ron Paul were not going to win. Even though he still, even himself, said that he didn't have the delegates to win. But they wanted to ensure that he didn't have a spectacular showing. If you remember, too, what ended up happening is they wouldn't mention Ron Paul's name reading the votes. And the crowd was shouting out. And it was pretty interesting. And the establishment GOP didn't like that. Thing with Trump is he's not a Ron Paul. He is a authoritarian. He might play to your emotions. Yeah, those illegal immigrants, and play off your emotions to make government bigger, which will end up encroaching on your life and not solving any problems, like everything government ends up doing in passing. And, it's funny because people are constantly calling it out. And it might be, conservatives calling it out on conservative things, and liberals calling it out on more liberal things. But then they'll constantly push those things on each other and wonder why it happens. Again, that goes back to, we don't truly have a two-party. We have a one-party, the authoritarian, progressive party. And when I mean progressive, I'm talking progressing government control over people. Authoritarian government. I think Rand Paul would have been the best bet. But I hope, now that he's out of the race, I hope he goes and walks out into the woods and capitulates, his true belief in freedom and liberty. And, do you believe in a free people? Do you remember Hayek, Bastiat? Do you remember libertarian philosophy? The ideas that people fear freedom, because what about the murder, the rapists, the thieves? While they're living in a fallacy, when reality right there in front of them, with as much government control that is out there now compared to the past, and we still have murderer, rapists, thieves, people that don't care about your rights, while we have a government that doesn't care about your rights. So we need to start getting people in office that have that ideology. We need a society that's willing to believe in that type of ideology, because we don't have a society where communities are truly looking out for each other, we have a society where people feel like they're trapped. You have to worry about the murder, the rapists, and the thieves. Then you have to worry about the people that are supposedly there to help you to be murderer, rapists, or thieves. Because for some reason there's a lot of people in society that forget the fact that even though these people are cops, even though these people are firefighters, even though these people are doctors, even though they're still human beings, you still have to have enough control of your life to be able to protect yourself. And we have to have a society that says, yes, you must protect yourself. We hope that, the people that we elect or hire for security are going to be honest people. But we have to be able to protect ourselves when they're not. We hope those people that we hire, that volunteer to do many things, or even elect to be honest, true people, but we need to preserve the right as a society to protect ourselves, as individuals to protect ourselves from, we could be one of these countries that every aspect of what you do is controlled. There's some of those going on right now in the Middle East. And, we look at who created ISIS, who helped, arm ISIS. You got Rand Paul out there. The U.S. has armed, whether it be, intentionally or unintentionally, have armed people. So, and those people end up being terrorists. We have Fast and Furious. That you look at Fast and Furious we allowed guns to go into the hands of drug cartels. When they took down Chapo this last time, a 50 cal that linked back to Fast and Furious. So we have to understand that, not everybody that gets put in these positions are people that are trustworthy. Okay, get to this here. Maybe. Try to get here to load up. I don't know if it will. Let's try to reload it here one more time. Okay. I think I got it here. Sorry. For some reason, I have Skype running and tends to slow down everything. There we go. Now we have here, fact check. Hillary Clinton claims Russia has not gone after ISIS. And this out of Truth and Media. During the last Democratic debate Thursday, Hillary Clinton defended her reservation towards Russia by claiming that Russians have not gone after ISIS or any of the other terrorist groups. Clinton's statement was in response to comments made by rival Bernie Sanders when he was asked if he was prepared to move militarily against Russia or to institute further economic sanctions. Sanders called the United States' relationship with Russia complicated and said that although he believes the U.S. should do our best in developing positive relations with Russia, he also stands by President Obama in believing that Russian President Vladimir Putin needs to be shown that his aggressiveness is not going to go unmatched. Clinton replied that she believes an agreement on a ceasefire is something that has to be implemented more quickly than the schedule that the Russians agreed to. You know the Russians wanted to buy time. Are they buying time to continue their bombardment on behalf of the Assad regime to further decimate what's left of the opposition, which would be a grave disservice to any kind of eventual ceasefire? Clinton also said she is worried that the Russians are doing everything they can to destroy what's left of the opposition, and she claimed that the Russians have not gone after ISIS or any of the other terrorist groups. So let's support what Secretary Kerry and the President are doing, but let's hope that we can accelerate the ceasefire because I fear that the Russians will continue their bombing, try to do everything they can to destroy what's left of the opposition, and remember the Russians have not gone after ISIS or any of the other terrorist groups. Russia began launching airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria on September 2015. Syrian state media claimed the airstrikes began after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad requested help and that the move was criticized by the U.S. A report from Reuters on January 20th claimed that the Russian airstrikes in Syria are gradually weakening both ISIS militants and the Free Syrian Army, allowing Assad to gain more power and to make one of its most significant gains since the start of the Russian intervention by capturing the town of Salma in Latakia province. The report noted that out of the 3,000 people killed by Russia airstrikes in Syria since they began in September, nearly 900 were members of ISIS. The group lost control of the city of Ramadi in December and has cut fighters' pay since its oil smuggling operations are hit by plunging prices. However, the report also noted that Russia's operation has harmed rebel groups in the area who are reporting intensified airstrikes and ground assaults in areas of western Syria that are of greatest importance to Assad. Investigative journalist Ben Swan reported on the origin of ISIS in March 2015, and he noted that ISIS grew out of a group of U.S.-backed rebels who were attempting to defeat Assad. However, Swan said that even when the U.S. government became aware that ISIS was capturing U.S. equipment. It did nothing because ISIS fighters were taking the equipment back into Syria to continue fighting Assad, which was the U.S. government, is what the U.S. government wanted. So, you know, her claims that Russia hasn't gone after ISIS. Well, why is this? Well, we know that the Benghazi thing is linked to gun running. We know that there is a lot of unanswered questions about Benghazi, and her reactions to questions about it kind of tend to make you go, she seems like she's hiding something. Because when you get that angry when you're asked, you know, at this point, you know, why does it even matter? Well, it matters because of what you do in retaliation. If we were doing something over there that provoked it, maybe the retaliation should be at the officials that caused that situation, not the people that reacted to maybe, I don't know, being attacked or, you know, having their country taken over by foreign forces. Or us arming radicals that are beheading Christians. And this one covers what Luke Radowski kind of skimmed over real quick. And this is new email show press literally taking orders from Hillary. Truthomedia.com. The emails were obtained by Gawker as part of a large Freedom of Information Act request back in 2012. They show a 2009 exchange between Mark Ambinder, then politics editor at The Atlantic, and Philip Raines, a close assistant and advisor to Clinton during her days as Secretary of State. Ambinder asked Raines for an advance copy of a speech Clinton was scheduled to give at the Council on Foreign Relations. Rather than simply say yes or no, Raines cut a deal with Ambinder, turning over the speech provided Ambinder agreed to 3 conditions. 1, in your own voice, describe the speech as muscular. You note that a look at the CFR seating plan shows that all the envoys from Richard Holbrooke to George Michael to Dennis Ross will be arrayed in front of her, which in your own clever way you can say certainly not a coincidence and meant to convey something. You don't say you were blackmailed. Ambinder agrees in the exchange, and his subsequent article shows that he followed Raines' demands to the letter. Clinton's speech is dubbed muscular in the second sentence, and the suggestive arrangement of Holbrooke, Michael, and Ross is noted immediately afterwards. Ambinder never reveals that he was fulfilling demands made by Raines. In essence, in return for a scoop, Ambinder allowed Clinton's team to dictate part of his coverage. The Atlantic has updated the nearly 7-year-old article to reflect Gawker's revelations. On February 9th, 2016, Gawker called the reporting of this post into question. It is the Atlantic's policy never to cede to sources editorial control of the content of our stories, the magazine said. Ann Binder wasn't the only person who may have followed demands from Raines. Mike Allen of Politico also used the muscular label for Clinton's speech, and he also made a note of the arrangement of figures like Holbrook and Ross. Allen taking orders from Raines wouldn't be a huge shock, as it was recently revealed that Allen allowed Raines to ghostwrite an item in his popular daily playbook email. Ann Binder is still a contributor editor at the Atlantic, but his main job is now as editor at large of the week. Ann Binder justified his actions by saying he also corresponded with Raines by phone and that the email record was at best an incomplete log of what happened. Since I can't remember the exact exchange, I can't really muster up a defense of the art, and frankly, I don't really want to, Ann Binder told Gawker. I will say this, whatever happened here reflects my own decisions and no one else's. Ann Binder's willingness to essentially produce Clinton press copy is particularly notable given an article he wrote in 2015 claiming the press would have a combative relationship with a Clinton presidential campaign. They'll give her no quarter, and they'll provide a good source of accountability tension until Walker or whomever emerges from the maelstrom he predicted. Ann Binder's behavior isn't necessarily a surprise, though, based on other emails Gawker published that showed an almost psychopathic. I don't mean what I mean here. Where did it go? Psychopathic attitude towards Clinton. In one brief message to Raines, he said, Clinton kick ASS. I'll meet the press, and in another, he effusively said Clinton was pitch effing perfect at a press conference. And, you know, we kind of figured this stuff to happen. We see how news articles come out. We see how when people are doing real good and they don't get any press coverage. There for a long time, Rand Paul was doing really good. They had press coverage at the beginning. Then they stopped having press coverage, and then Trump got in. As a rumor. It was funny because, you know, you start seeing Rand Paul get little spots here and there on almost every little show. And then they start talking about, will Trump join the presidential bid? Will Trump? Oh, Trump's in. Well, Trump's in. Trump's attacking this person. Trump's attacking that person. Well, what happened to Rand Paul? You know, he just completely fell off. And they just didn't cover much of it. They kept just covering Trump and then Jeb Bush. And back and forth. And eventually, once the polls started showing Rand falling off, then they started covering polls. It was almost like it was a systematic. Why? I think it has more to do with he's been trying to play the politics of the game, but because of who his father is, they don't trust him. And I think I almost wonder if he's trying even harder because of that. But I think it would be a bad thing to go that direction. But we'll see what happens with that. Oh wow, we are coming up towards the end of the broadcast here. Um, that last article was from truthandmedia.com. Um, again, go check out the rest of that article over behind the Oregon standoff at thenewamerican.com. Again, titled Behind the Oregon Standoff. Really good written article. When we look at this coming election cycle, I think that we have to really just say screw the federal election, because really we're screwed no matter. Everyone that's running, we're screwed. Whether you believe it or understand it or not. It's every damn one of them wants power. It comes down to every one of them wants power for their own agenda. And we're not going to get to a point of a freer society when we're electing those people. What we should be focusing on really intensely are our local elections. And you should go out and try to find those real constitutional or libertarian type sheriffs and county seats and push hard for those people. Make those the name that everybody sees and hears and knows that you talk to, and basically do what they do, which is constantly say, well, that's the only guy that has a good plan, that could really win it because that he has a good enough plan. Because we need those constitutional libertarian type people in those positions if we're ever going to stop federal governments from harassing us, whether it be Republican or Democrat. And we also need to start taking more vested interest in who we are as people and neighbors and a community. We've shown in the past that when we have strong communities, that you don't tend to have as much problems. You're always going to have some. But a lot of it comes down to the communities people grow up in. From a little kid to a young adult, what communities and the society they see as they grow up will dictate how they see and feel about life and society. And we have to change that. No one else is going to change that. The government's definitely not going to change that. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And don't forget to support UCY, ucy.tv. Scroll down the bottom, click the Amazon button, or you can hit the support tab at the top and donate. And antityrannynews.com/metal. Check out Amagi Metals, as we see right now with the financial. Seems like a recession getting ready to hit. Gold has been soaring, and stocks have been taking a pretty good hit. So I've been telling people why gold and silver has been down, that this is probably the time to buy it because we're not